This top part we can ignore. This is not for us. And we're going to start here where it says start here. Part 1 is a relationship part. In our example, we're filing this petition for a spouse. If you are filing this petition for your child or parent, you'll have to select one of these boxes. But if you're filing this petition for your spouse or your sibling, you don't have to fill this out. You don't have to check anything here. Moving on to question 3. If the beneficiary is your brother or sister, are you related by adoption? If you're filling out for spouse, you can also leave this blank. Question 4. Did you gain lawful permanent resident status or citizenship through adoption? You would want to answer this question here. Moving on to part 2. Again, this is asking about the petitioner. So right here, it's asking for alien registration number, USCIS online account number, and social security number. If you don't have an alien registration number, you can just leave this blank. You can also type not applicable. However, it's not really necessary anymore to write not applicable in empty spaces on these applications. And obviously, if you have a social security number, you can write it here. Then moving on, right here, you would want to provide your name, again, the petitioner. And again, another question I frequently get asked is, if I don't have a middle name, should I put not applicable or should I just leave it blank? I just left it blank. Moving on to part 2, continued. Any other names used? So here, if you used any other names like aliases or maiden names, and if you used multiple different last names, for example, you can also use the additional information page here at the very end in part 9. I do get asked if you should be including names like social media names or nicknames that you just use with your friends, and no, is asking for names that you have indicated on other documents or anywhere else that can be tracked. So for example, if there's ever been any different spellings of your name that you have used on records or with any agencies, that this is where you would write those. So if that doesn't apply to you, you could just say not applicable, or again, you can leave this blank. Okay, so next you would want to provide the petitioner's place of birth, birth date, and sex. And then here you want to provide the petitioner's mailing address. Next, select if your mailing address is the same as your physical address. So physical address just means where are you currently residing. A lot of people typically reside in the same place that their mailing address is. However, if your mailing address is different, then you would click no and move on to this part right here and fill in your physical address where you actually live. However, if it's the same, you can leave this blank and you don't have to fill it out under physical address 1. I also get asked, for example, if your mailing address is a PO box instead of an actual address. So right here, you would just write in care of name. So your name, for example, and then right here on street number name, you can write PO box, whatever it may be, and then where it is located. So moving on again to address history, this is asking to provide physical address for the past 5 years. So you want to provide your current address first, if it is different from mailing address in the previous items. So physical address 2, this is where you would indicate an address where you've lived prior to your current address. So in our case, John Doe lived at his second physical address between the years 2020 and 2021. So as you can see, we still have a couple of years of addresses that don't fit here that we must cover because it's asking us to provide addresses for the past 5 years. So what we can do is we can fill this out in the additional information page. So here we are located on page 2, and this is part 2. So when you scroll all the way down again to the additional information page, here you can see I filled in page 2, part 2, physical address 3. So this is the address that John Doe lived at prior to the year 2020. So you can fill this in here, and don't forget to write date from and date to. Moving on. So after you fill out the physical address history, you're going to move on next section, marital information, how many times you've been married. So John Doe's been married once and he's currently married, which makes sense because we're filing this for our spouse. Date of current marriage, you put here when the current marriage occurred and where, place, city or state, or if it happened in another country, then you can fill this out as well. Moving on, names of all your spouses. So here you would want to provide the information on your current spouse first and then any other prior spouses. So because we're filing this application for our current spouse, let's say her name is Jane Doe. This is the petition for her. So this is where we will write her. And then date marriage ended. Again, you can either leave this blank or you can put not applicable. And John only has ever been married once right here to Jane, and he's never had any prior spouses. So right here, we're just going to say not applicable. However, again, if the petitioner has ever been married in the past to anybody else, you can indicate this here. I did get a question before. What if the petitioner prior to the current marriage was actually widowed? What is the date marriage ended here? Because when you're widowed, obviously there's no divorce finalization date or anything like that. So you can write here, for example, the death date for your prior spouse. Okay, moving on. Information about your parents. So this is asking again about the petitioner's parents. Their date of birth, their sex, and then right here you want to provide where your parent was born and where they're currently residing. Parent 2 information, so here you want to write your other parent. So in John Doe's case here, we wrote his father's name right here, and his father was born in the US, and let's say that John Doe's father is actually deceased, so this is where you're going to write that he's deceased. And moving on, additional information about you. Here you want to select if you are a US citizen or permanent resident, and then how you acquired your citizenship. Next, answer if you have obtained certificate of naturalization or certificate of citizenship. So if you selected any of these two options, naturalization or through parents, then you would obviously have to select this, and here you would have to provide information about that. However, if you were just born in the United States, chances are you probably are not going to have this, so you can just leave this blank. Next, only complete the section if you're a lawful permanent resident. It's asking about your class of admission, place of admission, and how you got your permanent resident status. Next, moving on to petitioner's employment history. You want to provide, again, employment history over the past 5 years, your current employment first, and currently if you're unemployed, typo print unemployed in the first line. So we're going to say that the petitioner actually is employed and provide the employment information here. I do get asked, for example, if the petitioner is currently a student, should they be writing student, for example? The answer is probably no, because if you're a full-time student and you don't have a job, you are considered unemployed. So you could just write unemployed in the first line and write dash student, for example, like this. And you don't have to provide the address of your college where you're currently a student. You can just leave the rest of this blank. So moving on to employer 2, this is where you want to indicate where you have worked prior to this date, that whatever date you indicated that you worked at your current job. And then again, it's asking for the past 5 years. We don't have enough room, so we can actually scroll all the way down to the additional information page again and correspond to the page number and part number that asked us about employment information, and here indicate your other employers, for example. So moving on, after the employment information, you want to provide your biographic information here in part 3, so your ethnicity, race, height, weight, eye color, hair color. So moving on to part 4. Now this is information about the beneficiary. So this is if you're filing for your spouse, then this is where you're going to be including your immigrant spouse's information. If you're filing for your parent, obviously this is where you would include your parent information. These first 3 questions are asking for the beneficiary's alien registration, USCIS number, or US Social Security number. So you can include those here. Again, if the beneficiary doesn't have an A number, you don't have to include it here. Neither is USCIS account number. You can leave it blank, or you could say not applicable. For alien registration number, I do get this question a lot. If the beneficiary, for example, was completing an OPT and with their employment authorization card, they received an alien registration number, should they be including it here? So there isn't a specific answer to that. You can, if you want to, include your current alien number here if you already have one. However, you will probably receive a completely different alien number after submitting this petition. However, you can include it just in case. Here, include beneficiary's full name. Other names used, if the beneficiary ever used any other names, again, aliases, maiden names, nicknames, you can write them here. And if you don't have enough space to include those here, you can also use the additional information page at the very bottom of this application. Again, moving on, information about beneficiary, their place of birth, country, date of birth, sex, and has anyone ever filed this petition for the beneficiary? We're going to say no. Beneficiary's physical address. So here you would want to indicate where the beneficiary is currently living. And the rule of thumb is if the beneficiary is currently inside the United States, if you are applying for them from inside the United States, as well as their adjustment of status at the same time, if they're eligible, obviously, then this is where you would want to write their current address where they're residing in the US. However, if the beneficiary is currently located outside the US, then obviously this is where you would write their current foreign address. Moving on, provide information about where the beneficiary intends to live in the US. If it's the same as this address we indicated above, we can write same in this line 12A right here. Next, provide the beneficiary's address outside the United States if different from before. So I do get asked, for example, if the beneficiary is just a visitor or an international student in the US and they're currently in the US, however, should they be writing their address here, their foreign address here? So if the beneficiary is an immediate relative of a US citizen, then chances are your application will probably, then you are eligible to submit your adjustment of status application and everything from inside the United States, and this address is really not going to matter. So you can leave this blank really if you don't feel like it applies to you. However, again, if you're filing this petition for your relative that is outside of the United States right now, and this is where you wrote their outside address, then you can fill out this section with the address where your relative is planning to live in the US. And then in this line, you would write same if their foreign address is the same as the address they currently indicated here. So moving on, don't forget to provide the beneficiary's phone number here, daytime phone number here, and mobile phone number here. I mean, if they're the same, that's perfectly fine. You can repeat the same number twice, and the beneficiary's email address. Next, moving on to beneficiary's marital information. So in our case, we're going to say that Jane Doe has actually been married twice. So she's currently married. And here you want to indicate date of her current marriage, where the current marriage occurred. Here in the later section, you want to provide information on all beneficiary spouses. Again, you want to provide the information on the current spouse first, and then any other previous spouses. So John Doe is going to be first, again. And date marriage ended is not applicable because they are still married, and this is a spousal petition. And here on spouse 2, you can indicate names of prior spouses. So say, for example, Jane was married to Jack Smith before. And here you want to write when that marriage ended. So this is the date that would be on the court documents, on the divorce decree, when your divorce was finalized. Okay, moving on to the section about beneficiary's family. So right here, you're asked to provide information about the beneficiary's spouse and children. So again, under person 1, you want to indicate current spouse once again, even if we already wrote them here in the spousal information. Next, moving on, any other children. So we're going to say that Jane actually has a child from previous marriage with Jack Smith. So here, want to write, for example, her child's name, relationship, obviously, date of birth, and where the child was born. So in this example, Jane's daughter, Anastasia, is actually going to be John Doe's stepchild. So in order for Anastasia to immigrate, John Doe will also have to submit a separate I-130 petition for this child as well. If John Doe was a green card holder, for example, then we wouldn't need to submit a separate petition, but that can come at a later section. Any other persons, so if there's any other children, then you would include them in these sections here. Moving on, beneficiary's entry information. Was beneficiary ever in the United States? So we could say yes. If the beneficiary is currently in the United States, then you would need to complete these sections. However, if they're not currently here, you don't have to fill this out. So I did get questions before, for example, I'm filing for my mother or father or my sibling or my spouse even that visited me before, but right now they are located outside the United States. Should I be completing this section? And the answer is no. However, if the beneficiary is currently located in the United States, then obviously you want to fill out this information. And this is asking for the most recent arrival. When did the beneficiary arrive most recently, as listed on their I-94, for example? So you want to write your class of admission. And the class of admission is the type of visa that you held. If you click this arrow here, you will see all of these different types of visas. And Jane Doe is an F1 academic student. Form I-94 arrival departure record number. So you can obtain this number by going to the DHS CBP website. So if you just Google Form I-94, it will take you to the page where you can obtain it. You're going to have to input your first and last name, your date of birth, your passport information. This is where you would obtain your I-94 number. Date of arrival, again, this is asking about the date of most recent arrival to the United States. And date of authorized stay. So it will tell you on your I-94 when your authorized stay expires, or if you are under a specific type of visa, such as, for example, F1 academic student, then your expiration status will say D/S. So this is the same way you can write it here. And again, if you're not able to complete any of this information in the Adobe Reader, you can fill it out with a black pen later on, after you print out this form. Next, include the passport number, travel document number if you have one. If you don't, you can just leave this blank. I do get asked if travel document number is the same as visa number, and the answer is no. Travel document number is an alternative to a passport number. Sometimes people travel or come from countries that don't have a passport. This happens in rare cases, and you can leave it blank if you don't have it. Obviously, country of issuance of your passport or travel document and date of expiration. Moving on to beneficiaries' employment information, even if they are employed outside the US. And then if beneficiary is currently unemployed, type of print unemployed. So we're going to say that Jane is currently unemployed. Moving on. additional information about beneficiary. Was beneficiary ever in immigration proceedings? So this is asking if beneficiary ever was in removal, rescission, deportation proceedings, or any other judicial proceedings related to immigration. Then you can answer yes or no. If none of these apply, then obviously answer no. But if you answered yes, select which one and indicate where these proceedings were occurring. Moving on. So if the beneficiary's native written language does not use Roman letters, type or print his or her name and foreign address in their native written language. So you can indicate this here. However, just to let you guys know that this is most likely for beneficiaries who are currently located outside of the United States, because this is good information for them to have if they ever transfer your application to the local NVC or embassy in your home country. But it doesn't hurt to include all the information that they're asking for just in case. So we can include it here if needed. And again, this is only asking if your native written language doesn't use Roman letters. So Roman letters means English letters. So if your native written language is English, Spanish, French, Italian, then you don't need to write anything here. However, if your native written language is like Cyrillics or characters like Korean, Chinese, Japanese, or Sanskrit, then here you can include that information. Moving on. If filing for your spouse, provide the last address at which you physically lived together. If, for example, you are filing for your parent or sibling, you can obviously leave this completely blank. However, for the spouse, this is asking for the most recent address at which you physically resided. And for us, this is the same address where Jane and John Doe currently live together. And if you've never lived together, then you could just say never lived together in this line here, 59A. I do frequently get asked, what do I write here if, for example, my spouse is outside of the United States and I sometimes visit them in their home country? Would that consider living together? And the question is no. Living together means a prolonged period of time residing there, using this address for work and bills, etc., etc. If you just visited each other for a short period of time, then no, it doesn't constitute living together. Moving on. If the beneficiary is in the United States and will apply for adjustment of status or lawful permanent resident at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, then provide it here. So if currently the beneficiary is inside the U.S., then you can here write your nearest USCIS office. If you know what it is, then you can write it here. Or if you don't know what your nearest USCIS office is, then you can just write your current place where you are living, your town and state. That is where you will have your green card in. However, if the beneficiary is currently outside the United States, then you can ignore this section and move on to this section right here. That says the beneficiary will not apply for adjustment of status, but he or she will apply for an immigrant visa abroad at the U.S. embassy or consulate. So here you can write your nearest embassy or consulate in your home country. Moving on to part 5, other information. So this is asking if the petitioner has ever filed a petition for this beneficiary or any other alien. So we answered no. However, if you as a petitioner previously filed petitions for anyone else, like your parents or your children before, then obviously you can include yes here and provide their informations. And here it's asking if you are submitting separate petitions for other relatives, provide their names and your relationship here. So like I explained earlier, John Doe is a U.S. citizen filing for his spouse, but also his spouse has her own child from a previous marriage, and this child is considered John's stepchild, and he will be filing a separate I-130 petition for her. So here we want to include her name. And again, if you're filing for each of your parents, for example, then this is where you would put in the name of the other parent that you will be filing this petition for, that you didn't include in this application, for example, who wasn't the beneficiary of this direct application. And finally, this is just a disclaimer here about the fact that USCIS investigates these claimed relationships. It will be verifying the validity of the documents. It talks about the penalties of what can happen if you lie on the application. And for example, if you're petitioning for a spouse and you don't have a bona fide marriage relationship, and you entered marriage just for the purposes of immigration, this talks about the repercussions of that. Part 6 is the statement, contact information, and declaration and signature. So obviously here you want to write, if you, as a petitioner, submitted it yourself, you can say, I can read and understand English. And here you can indicate that. Or if somebody translated and helped you translate, interpret this document and fill it out for you, then you can select 1B. And then if anybody else prepared this form for you, you can also check question 2. Right here, don't forget to write what language they interpreted it in. And right here, if you're using a preparer, don't forget to write the name of this preparer and include your contact information, again, phone number, email address, and right here, your signature and date when you signed it. Please don't forget to sign this, because if you don't sign it in ink, the application will get rejected. So you cannot sign this in Adobe. You cannot type your name here. You must print this out and sign it in ink. And finally here, if you did use an interpreter, you can include their information here, and they would have to certify that they are fluent in English and this other language, and then sign. And then if you use the preparer, so somebody who was preparing this petition for you, obviously you can include their information here. Again, if this doesn't apply to you, you can just put not applicable, or you can leave these areas blank. And when we get to the very end, this is the additional information page, and obviously here is all the additional information that we have ever included. So this concludes the step-by-step application for Form I-130, Petition for Alien Relative. I highly suggest that you check out other videos on my channel. I have a lot of different videos about immigration, the entire process. I have received a lot of feedback from many people about how confident they feel and how prepared they feel after watching all my videos and filling out all the forms on their own. Thank you for watching this video. Good luck with the process. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have any questions, you can reach out on Instagram, Facebook, or email, and all of those will be listed under this video. Bye.